let's talk about one of the things that is contributing to their woes here, which is that reconciliation bill, the Build Back Better plan. I really wish, I know I say it every time, but I really wish they'd come up with a better name. This is so terrible. Okay, so here's the very latest. Let's throw this tweet up on the screen that we have. So last week there was a bunch of commentary and visuals that came out. There was this meeting between Joe Manchin and Bernie Sanders. Well, now we're getting some of the behind the scenes details of what went on in that meeting. This is Elena Treen. She said, with Axios, she says, scoop, Joe Manchin and Bernie Sanders squabbled behind closed doors Wednesday, with Manchin using a raised fist goose egg to tell his colleagues he can live without any of President Biden's social spending plan. If you click through to that piece, they talk to another witness who was there, Senator Chris Coons, very close ally of Joe Biden, who said, quote, there was a vigorous 10-minute discussion. Bernie said $6 trillion. Manchin said, we shouldn't do it at all. Coons recalled himself making that goose egg symbol as he recounted the conversation. He said Manchin indicated it will contribute to inflation. We've already passed the American Rescue Plan. We should just pass the infrastructure bill and, pause for 6 months. So even though there were a lot of sort of amicable noises that came out of this meeting, the reality is that behind closed doors, they were incredibly far apart. And I think, I don't know that Manchin is bluffing here. I mean, yes, he and Sinema and some of the other bad actors in the Democratic Party, they do want the infrastructure bill to pass. It is something that their corporate donors would like to see. But I'm just not sure that it's as much of a deal breaker for them to not get that infrastructure bill as progressives were ultimately hoping. I don't think Manchin is totally bluffing here that he'd be comfortable with, at the end of the day,
I agree,
nothing getting through. So that's kind of where the impasse is. There's some more details coming out on the tax front. And this is interesting. So Kyrsten Sinema said she didn't want to lift the marginal tax rate on high-income individuals or on corporations. So it was kind of back to the drawing board for Democrats. What's a twist in the story is that those rates are a little bit irrelevant, especially for super high wealth individuals. So we covered last week that Cliff Asness piece talking about the working rich. Now, listen, I'm not going to cry any tears for people who are making $500,000 a year and see their taxes go up. I'm perfectly fine with that. But it is true that up to this point, the tax plan that was offered from Biden really didn't hit billionaires or super high wealth individuals at all. It did not go after any of their pet loopholes that they use to avoid taxes over their entire lives. So now, with Sinema ruling out the marginal rate increases, they're actually thinking of doing a form of a billionaire tax. I'll give you a little bit of the details of that in a minute, but here's what Speaker Pelosi had to say to Jake Tapper on that topic.
Senator Sinema, who was a key Arizona Democrat vote in the Senate, Senator Sinema has said she will not support raising the corporate tax rate, raising the tax on high wage earners. And President Biden has acknowledged that might mean you can't pay for the rest of the bill using those sources of revenue. Do you have an alternate way?
Yeah, we do, because we were ready to pay for 3.5.
Right.
So we certainly can pay for half of that.
And what is that alternate way? Is it a billionaire's tax? Is it a minimum tax for corporations?
Is, shall we say, has an appeal, but it doesn't produce that much money.
Okay.
Because the bill is not written yet, we hope it will be written today and introduced tomorrow. Only then can the Joint Tax Committee evaluate what it brings in. We anticipate $250 billion, but we need closer to $2 trillion.
So
we have other things.
Such as?
Well, such as we have enforcement, and that's several $100 billion. We have the overseas harmonization of taxes, and that's a few $100 billion. We have an array. And I'm not going to say what they are right here.
So they've also talked about this sort of global minimum tax for corporations.
A minimum tax that corporations have to pay regardless of all the exemptions, which frankly would be better than the current corporate tax rate.
Correct. Yeah. And that would be better than even lifting the top marginal tax rate, because none of the big corporations pay that anyway. It's a farce. The specific proposal under consideration and why, because she says ultimately it wouldn't raise that much revenue, which is a little bit of a head scratcher.
Right, you're like, wait a second. So almost all the wealth is held by the top 1%, but a tax on the top 1% isn't going to raise that much.
But the reason why...
Maybe the taxes are off.
Right, well, and the reason why is because when she says a billionaire tax, they literally mean it would only apply to billionaires, which is like 1,000 people. So the proposal under consideration comes from Ron Wyden. It would impose an annual tax on unrealized capital gains on liquid assets held by billionaires. I think that liquid assets part also probably is why it wouldn't ultimately raise that much money.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's only supposed to affect people with $1 billion in assets or $100 million in income for 3 consecutive years. So it would only apply to about 1,000 people. And that liquid assets part, I have a feeling, really limits what they're able to do with it too. Still, at least you're thinking about doing something that would impact the billionaire class.
I'm just trying to get my mind around how exactly you can tax. How are liquid assets already not being taxed, right? So like,
what's your definition of liquid? Because if it's cash, then you have realized
then you already have to pay a tax. Exactly. So I'm just trying to figure out what a liquid asset, which is non-taxable, even looks like. But maybe that's why I'm not a billionaire. So there you go. I'm sure there is some sort of tax shelter or something.
Yes.
But yeah, look, it clearly doesn't go far enough in terms of what it would actually look like. And even actually legally, it also does get sketchy in terms of taxing unrealized capital gains, in terms of stocks, equities, and more, because it's like, well, if you haven't realized it, does that mean then that they can write off all their losses? Which I think you can to a certain extent, but it can get very sketchy. As I understand it legally, whenever you're trying to do that, given fluctuations, really what it is that they're still not going after, Krystal, the carried interest loophole or the step-up basis. Those are the 2 most basic ones. Carried interest loophole alone is like $180 billion over 10 years. Easy. I've got your money, Nancy. It's right there. You just don't want to do it.
That's going to hurt black business owners creating wealth.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's what Al Sharpton tells us. Step-up basis is untold hundreds of billions if you wanted to go after that one. Once again, they go after all of these convoluted schemes, which are difficult to understand. I'm beginning to see people, online pushback of like, wait, they can go after, like my Bitcoin or whatever. It's like, no, you're not. Unless you're a Bitcoin billionaire, I think you're probably
going to be okay.
Yeah, it's like, unless you made $100 million in assets for 3 consecutive years, or you're worth an entire $1 billion, you are not going to be affected by this. But regardless, they make it very difficult in order to understand how exactly it would work. How are people even supposed to know what that means? You're actually not even really going after the majority of the wealth whenever it comes to what's actually happening here. And the easiest ways to do it, you've ruled out because you're corporate donors. Why are we playing all these kabuki theater games? Like, it's easy to figure out.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you mention that Manchin was in Delaware?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So there was a great summit, a meeting of the minds. I would love to be on that wall. Schumer, Manchin, and Biden in Delaware over the weekend. But I believe
they're
we have
not
a tear
sending
sheet
their
of that.
best, Saagar.
Yeah, they certainly are not. Let's put their tear sheet up there. So Joe Manchin was there down there in Delaware, but in terms of a statement that came out afterwards, it was basically just word salad. They were like, they've met, there was some developments, and that's pretty much it. Manchin appears agreeable in terms of the leaks that were put out from there, on board with the White House proposal for that billionaire tax that you talked about, and certain corporations, I think certain being the key one, I'm sure Coal's probably going to get a carve out there, to help pay for President Biden's new plan. But in general, nobody knows what's in this thing. Nobody knows whether it would affect them. The social spending ones, in terms of Manchin and the child tax credit and that, have not been resolved whatsoever. We are again repeating the Obamacare playbook. The truth is that there's no way anything is actually going to happen, in the next couple of weeks? I highly doubt that. In terms of the actual negotiations, then it's Thanksgiving, right? Everybody's gone for a week.
Yeah.
And then it's early December. Last time I checked, this town starts to go on holiday. The Christmas parties in D.C. start December 2nd, just so everybody knows.
Well, so let me tell you what they're saying.
Okay.
I wouldn't put a lot of stock in this, but I'll just tell you what they're saying. They want to come up with a top line number this week, Thursday.
Okay.
And they've sort of invented this deadline for themselves of like the highway transportation funding expires, something like that, expires at the end of the month. So they're saying, oh no, we got to figure this out before then. Not to get it passed, but at least get a top line number in the outlines. That's what they're saying. The last piece that just emerged over the weekend is that, we already covered last week what the pared back proposal looks like. And it sucks, right? It already sucked. There's very little to like about it. The one thing that you can really hang your hat on is universal pre-K. That would be good. But even the childcare provision with massively raised costs for the middle class, they took the paid leave and they're like, instead of 12 weeks, how about 4? Well, now they're thinking of getting rid of the paid leave altogether. And then the other thing that progressives were kind of hanging their hat on was, all right, well, we still got the money for the Medicare expansion, so we'd get vision, hearing, and maybe dental. Well, now they're saying, we may not do any of that.
Right.
Apparently, the dental is the most expensive and the most complicated to implement. So there were already some questions over whether that would get put in. And now they're saying, well, we may just strip out the hearing and the vision as well. So what's left really is pretty pathetic. That's just the bottom line. It's pretty pathetic. We know the climate change provision, the central core of that was stripped out because Manchin was opposed to it. We know they ruled out the best ways of going after the ultra wealthy's tax dodges. We know community college, free community college, which Biden said was one of his top priorities. They stripped that out and they're like, we're going to give you some scholarships instead.
And it was killed by the college industry. I want people to understand that.
Yeah, that's really important. So, after corporate lobbyists and their paid apparatchiks like Heidi Heitkamp got their hands on this thing, it is a tattered mess if any of it even passes at all, which, as I said last week, if you are a progressive, you should be committed to making sure that in its present form, it does not pass because it is not worth it. No one will ever take you seriously again. All of your priorities have been gutted. And if you just roll over, I don't know what you're doing. Wow. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut. Our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions. All that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.